What's the story, everyone? How are we all getting on? Welcome back to the channel, and let's talk about Chelsea because, oh my goodness me, Chelsea Football Club have fallen off the scales by an absolute mile, haven't they? And it's absolutely mental to think, throughout the majority of my lifetime as a kid and everything else, and I'm sure many people watching this video and many fans can relate to this, but Chelsea Football Club for the majority of the 2000s and even in the 2010s to a certain extent were the team. They were the team to be, they were the team to watch, and no matter how bad things were going for Chelsea at any moment in time in terms of managers, in terms of players not performing, you always felt like there were one or two players, away from turning it around, or there were potentially a new manager away from turning it around. It was maybe never sustainable. It was maybe it was never ethically correct what they were doing at the best of times in terms of spending, a fruit load of cash, and then also, sacking managers left, right, and centre when they never really actually had a huge reason to be sacked. I mean, some of them, when you think back to Carlo Ancelotti, a year after winning the double, he ends up getting sacked. Roberto Di Matteo wins Chelsea their first ever Champions League, and then he gets sacked a couple of months later. You think back to Jose Mourinho on two occasions, wins them their first Premier League title and wins their first league title in 50 years. And in the end, what ends up happening is he ends up getting sacked, a couple of years later. So it's mad to see what's happening right now with Chelsea. And I thought I'd make a video on it because, to be honest with you, it seems to not really get discussed by the mainstream media, and I don't know if people have become very normalised with how Chelsea are right now in terms of, they finished 12th last season, mid-table at the moment this season, looking like they're not going to get into Europe. Yes, they're in a cup final, but even at that, we saw how they performed against Liverpool a couple of days ago. Realistically, do they have much of a chance in that final? I think it's very slim. The Chelsea of old, you would say, always has a chance, always has an opportunity. There is something about Chelsea Football Club where they manage to somehow win trophies even when it looks absolutely impossible. But the thing is, that Chelsea is gone. That Chelsea is over. That Chelsea is finished, in my opinion. And it is mad to think because, fair enough, like everything happened with Roman Abramovich that happened, and obviously he had to sell the club and everything else, but like during Roman Abramovich's time, Chelsea were the most successful club in England. No team had won more trophies than Chelsea. Premier Leagues, Champions Leagues, FA Cups, League Cups, you name it. Chelsea won absolutely everything there was available to them. And yes, fair enough, they would sack managers left, right and centre. They would spend loads of money on different types of players. But it worked, and at the end of the day, Chelsea had a model, and it was quite a controversial model, but it was a model that worked, and it was a model that got them trophies. And the annoying thing about Chelsea as a Liverpool fan, and I suppose many neutrals will probably feel this way as well, was the fact that Chelsea were never a million miles away. They were never a million miles away, and you always felt like Chelsea were the type of club that could turn it around in an absolute instant. And as we said, Abramovich has to sell the club. Never in a million years would I have thought that the next owners coming in would completely rip up the club, rip up the fabric of the club, rip up the DNA, and Chelsea would go back to absolute square one. I mean, the sheer arrogance of Todd Bowley coming into Chelsea Football Club, and he's like, do you know what? Fair enough, this has all worked in the past. You have this controversial model in terms of sacking managers left, right, and centre. Obviously, it's been proven that maybe a few shady things were going on behind the scenes as well. But look, it was working. When Todd Bowley came into Chelsea Football Club, they had finished in two finals against Liverpool, lost both of them on penalties. They had won the Champions League just 12 months previous. They were in the Champions League again a year later. Chelsea Football Club were in a very, very good position. Fair enough, yes, they needed to go out and maybe sign one or two players. Maybe there was a rebuild that was coming. But for Todd Bowley to go in there and, Clearlake and that ownership group to go into Chelsea Football Club and completely tear up the fabric, completely rip it up, is just the sign of absolute sheer arrogance. And Chelsea Football Club, in my opinion, will never be the same as what they once were. And for Chelsea fans, that's a massive shame. Look, it doesn't mean that Chelsea will never win trophies. It doesn't mean that Chelsea won't be successful. It just means that Chelsea Football Club, as we once knew them under the Roman Abramovich era, and yes, okay, people might say Chelsea, even before Roman Abramovich, were a completely, entirely different club as well. But Chelsea under Abramovich, they had it all right. They had it, Always one or two players away, always a couple of managers away from winning major trophies. And Todd Bowley's come in and, first of all, sacking Thomas Tuchel after a couple of months, getting rid of players left, right and centre, spending ridiculous amounts of money on unproven players. Like, and I've seen a lot of people joking about Todd Bowley. It's like he's playing Football Manager in real life, or it's like he's walking into a candy store and he doesn't know which toy he wants to buy or which sweet he wants to buy, so he ends up just buying them all. And don't get me wrong, when you buy so many young players, you're bound to maybe get one or two who might end up being good. I think Cole Palmer is a very good player. I think Nkunku, from what I've seen, even though he's been injured for almost the majority of the season, I think is a good player. I still think there's a player in Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez. I don't think we should completely write them off just because they've had poor years. I do still think there's enough players there for Chelsea to kick them on and maybe get back into Europe. But as I said before, for Chelsea Football Club and for Todd Bowley to rip up the DNA, rip up the fabric, sell almost an entire squad and get rid of Thomas Tuchel as well, like, at the end of the day, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Don't get me wrong, the argument for a long time under Roman Abramovich and Chelsea was that the club wasn't sustainable, that the club, couldn't, I suppose that kind of model was not really working anymore, especially with financial fair play coming in. The fact that other clubs, I think sustainability now in football is such a huge thing in terms of, having your right structures behind the scenes, having your youth teams, your under 21 teams adopt similar styles of play as your first team, so that when you bring players through your academy, it's seamless and they can slot right in and they know exactly what they can do. That's one of the reasons, in my opinion, why Liverpool have been very successful in bringing through academy players. Manchester City similar, and even Manchester United, going as far back as the 2000s, have been very good at bringing through academy players, because ultimately and I know Manchester United is not like this anymore, essentially, but everything behind the scenes is structured correctly. And Chelsea just look a million miles off that. They look a million miles off that. They don't really seem to have an identity. They don't really seem to have a direction of how they want to go. This Moneyball style, like Leipzig model, I just don't really know if it works anymore, to be honest. I think it can work, but you can't be too over the top with it. Do you know what I mean? Like buying players left, right and centre. This isn't FIFA, this isn't Football Manager. And I think for Mauricio Pochettino, who in my opinion is a very good manager, he just looks completely out of his depth at Chelsea because of the fact that there's so many new players there, so many young players. He's trying to put all the pieces of the jigsaw together. He's probably got Todd Bowley in his ear. I mean, this whole thing about Todd Bowley when Frank Lampard was in charge, apparently doing team talks and all this crack, like, it's just absolutely wild what's happened to Chelsea. And as I said, they were a football club who always, you felt like, were never a million miles away. Even in that season under Mourinho, where they finished 10th or 11th, a year later Antonio Conte comes in and they win the Premier League. Now it's like you couldn't see them winning the Premier League anytime soon. They look a million miles off. And what does this mean for Chelsea Football Club moving forward in terms of their future? I mean, I do genuinely believe that the Chelsea Football Club, as we knew, will never be the same. They will never be the same as what they once were. And look, Todd Bowley, maybe it'll change up the ownership structures again in terms of how they buy players. Maybe it'll bring in a new manager. Maybe eventually some of these young players will eventually come good. But when you look at some of the issues that's happening with Chelsea behind the scenes as well, in terms of financial fair play issues, and I don't think this has been documented well enough by the media, but Chelsea Football Club have went out and spent so much money on players, putting them on 6, 7, 8 year contracts. And if Chelsea Football Club don't get into Europe soon, they are in massive trouble financially, and they could also be in huge trouble in terms of financial fair play as well. So, like, you could be talking about points deductions, you could be talking about transfer bans. There are so many potential future issues with Chelsea. You also have the issues with Roman Abramovich of the past, which obviously Todd Bowley and Clear Lake have notified the Premier League about. Again, there could be some sort of punishment that comes that way as well. So Chelsea Football Club are in massive, massive danger, in my opinion, of, like, you just don't know how bad this could get, to be honest with you. It could get really bad before it gets better for Chelsea. And the thing as well that was really apparent, like watching the Liverpool-Chelsea game, a couple of days ago, as a Liverpool fan, delighted with the victory and everything else. And yes, maybe we got a few decisions that sort of went our way in the game, but Chelsea just looked so a million miles off what many people thought they could be. you know, and even looking at the fans and everything else, and looking at Chelsea Football Club as a whole, they just now they don't look like an elite club anymore. They look like just any other ordinary club. I think it's going to be a long, long time before we see Chelsea back at the top table. I really do. Let me know your thoughts, your comments on Chelsea Football Club. What do they have to do to get back to the top table? It's such a mad situation because they've spent £1 billion on their squad in the last year. And like you look at them and think they need another billion. Do you know, like they need a striker. They probably need another midfielder. They need to sort out their defense. A lot of question. Obviously, the young goalkeeper Petrovic is looked all right, to be fair, but the lad before him, Sanchez, was all over the place. There's so many issues with Chelsea Football Club right now. There's so much work that needs to be done, and when you look at where Liverpool are at, even with a new manager next year, you look at where Man City are at. Obviously, they have financial problems looming as well. You've got Arsenal, you've got Man United, who I'm sure are going to want to put good things in place, obviously under new ownership as well. I think Chelsea are a million miles off. Chelsea Football Club will never be the Chelsea that we once knew. And like, even as a rival fan, it's like, don't get me wrong, I'd be lying if I said I was disappointed that that's going to be the case. But at the same time, it's mad to see what's happened to Chelsea Football Club, because at the end of the day, that could have been Liverpool, that could have been Arsenal, that could have been Man United, that could have been your team, you know, that's had the complete fabric, the DNA completely ripped. You know, the soul of the football club has been ripped out. It could have happened to any of us. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Chelsea. Look, maybe they can win the Carabao Cup, maybe they can still salvage the season. They're obviously still in the FA Cup, but for me, they look a million miles off being anywhere near the club that they were a couple of years ago. But let me know your thoughts, your opinions in the comments down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. My name's Aaron, and I'll see you when I see you.